What animal best represents you? Best answer. I want to kick it off while we're waiting for questions from you guys. I want to kick it off with the answer to that, because that's an interesting question. People still ask that, if you can believe that. It's like this throwback to this pseudo psychobabble that sort of came out in the 1970s. All of a sudden, it seems like the 70s were the golden age of psychologists coming out with theories that proved to be disastrously wrong, right? Things that were later completely disproven, right? It's the age of, primal scream therapy and, autism being caused by refrigerator mothers and, just a lot of false thinking happened in the 70s. At least that's the impression I get. And so this question is kind of something that, as far as I can tell, came out of that. Almost like with ink blot tests, those went back to I think the 50s, when ink blot tests came out. But it was almost like the version of ink blot tests that recruiters would ask in job interviews. It was this kind of psychology thing. What animal best represents you? And they were asking this question like they're dead serious in a job interview. And, you may not have prepared for this question, or you may not have heard of this question before. And so this took a lot of people by surprise. And, very abstract. And the bottom line, okay, here's what's actually going on in this question, if you're interested. It's dreamed up by people that have very abstract thinking. And so animals have different associations, I guess. Some animals are workers, like horses, right? They're a good worker. Or some animals, they're known for something. Like a dog is known for, among other things, being loyal, right? So, that's what they're probing for with this ridiculous question. They're saying, what animal best represents you? And if you say an animal that, negative connotations come to mind immediately, then that's an issue, right? For example, ants are known for being good workers, like worker ants, right? Along with horses and things. So the idea was that depending on what job you're going for, what qualities would be needed in the candidate, right? So for example, if you're going for a managerial level job, you're going to be making decisions on your own. You're not going to be necessarily consulting with people for everything you do or working as a team. You're going to be the sort of fearless leader. And so in theory, if they were to ask you this stupid question and you were to say an animal that was known for being part of a herd, right? Like a cow or a deer or something like that, that would not be the best answer if you were going for a management type job, right? Some animals, I'm not an animal expert, but they're independent, like polar bears. They don't live in communities of polar bears. They're sort of on their own, and that's how they live, right? They're solo animals that don't necessarily participate in a community and work as a team. So if you were getting a job where you were supposed to be a member of a team and work very closely with the people around you, and they said, what type of animal best represents you? And you said something like polar bear, that would indicate to these people, according to this theory, that you wouldn't be the most suitable candidate. Your personality's all wrong, right? You're more of a loner, a lone shark, lone wolf kind of thing, when they're looking for someone who's going to be part of a herd, someone who's going to work with everyone and make decisions together and act together and get approvals for everything, right? So that was the idea, okay? So if ever somebody asks you this question, you go to a job interview and they say, what animal best represents you? Instead of looking at having your jaw drop and looking at them, staring at them for 30 seconds while you process, can this person really be stupid enough to ask a question like this? You will know what to do. You think of an animal that has a couple of qualities that are needed for the job. A dog is a good answer because it's loyal. A horse is a good answer because it's a hard worker, right? Don't give any animals that have negative connotations like skunks or rats or mosquitoes or, vermin of any kind, and if you're going for a management type job, the cliche answer was to say eagle, because it flies high, it, looks at things down there from afar and, sees all and can operate independently, right? So that was the theory behind this question. So it's a more exotic question. You're probably not going to get this at every job interview you go to, but if you go to, say, 15 interviews, you're probably going to encounter this question once. Some person is out there that thinks it's a good idea to ask this, and that it will reveal something about you in what you say. That's what they think. So this is a throwback to the 1970s that is still around, like a lot of these cliche job interview questions. A lot of the questions they ask have been around for decades. Tell me about yourself. That's been around for decades. What salary do you need? That's been around for decades, like even longer. Why did you leave your last job? That's been around since as far as anyone's been able to research. These are very old. What is your weakness? Has also been with us for a very long time, right? These are common interview questions. And recruiters in this day and age, they like to dress up those questions and ask them in new and exciting ways. But it's the same question, right? So instead of saying, what is your weakness? They'll say, what is something that you're working on, or, something like that, right? But it's the same question. So you give the same answer. Anyway, so if ever you get that question, that's how you answer it. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. I wanted to cover that because, as you can imagine, I don't cover that one very often.